what I'm talking about here is my chapter in the book that Charmaine was discussing, the book that came out last year on secularism, race, and the politics of Islamophobia. Of course, there's the names of all of the great scholars who contributed to it. And so you're going to want to get your copy, so make sure you order it as soon as possible because we want to make sure Charmaine gets royalties, yeah? Exactly. Okay, so a little bit about my presentation, or my chapter. We all know Jürgen Habermas, German philosopher, sociologist of the Frankfurt School tradition. He took a whole lot of interest in Islam and Muslims, especially in Europe after 9/11, when it became an issue of why are the Muslims, why do they have some kind of sympathy in Europe for what happened on 9/11, right? Because there was a whole lot of nuanced critique of the West, and particularly of the United States. Yes, in Islam, we look at, the killing of innocent people and it's condemned, but also there was always the but that followed. And Habermas was very much worried about this but. What is this but for? Why is there? But America has done this, and the West has done this, right? So he took up the subject of how to integrate Muslims into what he calls the post-secular societies of Europe. And what he means by post-secularity is the reality of the increased secularization in the West, that the West continues to secularize, but also the realization that religion is not going away, right? That unlike traditional secularization theory, which saw religion disappearing within so many years, particularly in the West, it's not going away, although society continues to secularize. So it's both a condition and an awareness of that condition. That's what he calls post-secularity. Now, in this post-secular condition, he devises something. It's based on John Rawls's first proposition about the translation, but he amends that quite a bit. And what he's talking about is the translation of semantic and semiotic materials from the depths of Islam into post-metaphysical language. So this is what Muslims living in the post-secular condition have to do, right? To become fully part of these societies. They have to translate semantic and semiotic materials from the depth of Islam into post-metaphysical language. Now, all that means is that, especially taking ethical and moral ideals, values, and principles, and taking them out of the Islamic context, out of the Quranic context, for instance, out of the Hadith material, and putting it into language that is accessible to all people, right? Secular people, other people of other religious traditions, so that they can come to some kind of common language to discuss these moral issues. In doing so, religion, in this case Islam, escapes its closed semantic universe, right, of religion. That means if we talk about, asabiya or whatnot in the Islamic tradition, it's an Islamic form of solidarity. Well, that has to be translated into a universal form of solidarity. Once you do that, now you're including all the people of that given society in that discourse about solidarity, right? So it's a very easy concept to understand. So he puts down essentially these two mutual burdens. He says that, look, Muslims have to translate their moral and ethical material into post-metaphysical language. At the same time, non-Muslim citizens, Christian citizens, atheistic citizens, they have to be sincerely open to that translated material, into considering that translated material. The goal here is to produce a kind of neutral language by which all people of a given society can discuss these issues and take each other seriously, right? And so this is one of the things when he talks about, he gets critiqued on his stance on Islam in the West, and he says, look, Muslims have to be Muslim and integrated in the West, right? They can't just leave their Islam behind. With their Islam, they have to be integrated. But how do they do that? And that's this process of translation. Now, the response to Habermas's proposal did not really gain much traction in Germany in particular. It was thought to be naive, about the goals of Muslims, the goals of Islam. Of course, taqiyya is already brought up, you know what I mean? Well, look, this is just a way to sneak Islam into the state and things like this. The Syrian refugee crisis in 2014, 2015, ongoing, especially in Germany. That changed the mind of a lot of people about the possibility of integrating Muslims into European society. There seemed a feeling from a lot of people that Europe was inundated with foreigners, and these foreigners did not want to become Europeans, but they wanted to remain Muslim and somehow always alien. The proposal itself was called a Trojan horse by a lot of people, like I said, as a way of sneaking Islam into the post-secular society, into Germany in this case, and trying to give it some kind of level of respectability, right? Where it doesn't have any, it shouldn't be respected, except for being just another religious tradition. Now, some Muslim voices also criticized Habermas. They objected to the idea of translating Islam altogether, that Islam itself has to speak for itself in its theological language, in its moral language, and therefore to translate Islam was a form of bid'ah, a form of innovation, right? And you know, in the Islamic tradition, forms of innovation are not looked upon very well. And so to do this whole thing would be an exercise in bid'ah, innovation, right? Nevertheless, as I said, the project continues, while many on the far right see it as a threat to the entire European ethnosphere. Now, why does this matter? This matters because Europe, post-World War II, especially in Western Europe, has gone from the concept of a Volksgemeinschaft, right? A Volksgemeinschaft, or as a people's community. This is where the demos, the people themselves, are determined by their ethnos, right? Their ethnos are what Habermas calls pre-political foundations. This is the foundation of racial ethnicity, right? This is the foundation of language, shared history, shared tradition, shared ritual, shared religion, shared culture. You are German because you have all of these things, right? That's what makes you German. The Blutenboden, if you will, as it was articulated during the Nazi period. That's what makes you German, right? And this comes also from the idea of Geworfenheit in Heidegger, that you don't become someone of this people. You find yourself thrown into this people. You are German because you've been thrown into Germanness, right? And you share all these pre-political foundations. On the other hand, you have the kind of states that are called Willensgemeinschaften states, right? Or willed communities. These are communities that are born of the Enlightenment. So you can think of the French Republic. You can think of the American Republic. What does it mean to be a Willensgemeinschaft? It means that the demos, the people of that state, are unified by political foundations, not pre-political foundations, but by political foundations. So that's the Constitution, that is political principles, those are values, those are norms. So if you think about the American example, what makes us American is the Constitution. It's not our ethnicity, it's not our language, right? Anyone in the world is a potential American. No matter what religion they are, what ethnicity they are, it doesn't matter. If they come to America, right, and they go through the process of becoming an American citizen, it means they swear allegiance to a constitution. And that constitution is predicated on political ideals, not ancient history, not ancient languages, things like that. That simply doesn't matter. I'm no more of an American since my family arrived in North America in the 1600s. I'm no more of an American as someone who swears an oath to the Constitution becomes an American today, right? We're equal Americans because we have political foundations. Now, this is oftentimes what we call ascribed membership. These are naturalized citizens or descendants of naturalized citizens who do not share the legacy, ethnos, if you will, of the larger people, right? So if you think of Germany, the Germans who have been German and they can trace their lineage back hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of years, or the newly ascribed German people of Turkish origin or of Moroccan origin, right? They have ascribed citizenship. That's part of the Willensgemeinschaften state. Now, why does this matter? Well, It matters because what you have now with a lot of iterations of the far right is you have an attack against this very Willensgemeinschaften idea, right? So if you take the Nouvelle Droite in France, the New Right, they say, what if integration itself is not possible, right? Or what if it is possible, excuse me? How might the far right argue against it, right? Because what does it mean by that? If you have immigrants, newcomers, right, people who have become citizens of the country and they hold on to the constitutional values. I mean, just think about the what was it, the Burkini. Remember the Burkini controversy in France, you know? And it went all the way up to the Supreme Court of France, and they said what? They said, we are a free country. If women want to go to the beach wearing a burkini, that is their choice, right? That's what freedom is, right? Where the local state and city governments were saying, no, you can't wear a burkini. It's better to wear nothing at all than a burkini. It comes down to a strange position, but nevertheless, it was what they were, what it came down to the Supreme Court in France. So the question becomes now in the modern period, post-World War II, with the Willensgemeinschaften states of Europe that used to be Volksgemeinschaften states. What makes someone German? What makes someone French? What makes someone Dutch, right? Just as an example. Europe used to have closer Volksgemeinschaften states, ethnic-bound states, and now they're predominantly Willensgemeinschaften. America doesn't have that issue, right? That doesn't mean a lot of Americans don't have that issue. A lot of them do. They still think America is a European country, right? Euro-American country. But in the Constitution, it's not how it is at all. Does ascribed citizenship create new Germans, new Frenchmen, new Dutchmen, new Italians, new Spaniards? Does it really make them new? So if you're in Germany and you're of Turkish origin and you say, no, I'm German, what do so many Germans say? You're not German. You're a German citizen, but you're not German. Because they're still thinking in the Volksgemeinschaften way, as opposed to the Willensgemeinschaften way. So what can be done to stop the translation proviso from creating a unified Willensgemeinschaften states in Europe, right? This is a problem. Because why? Because Muslims come to Europe and they integrate well, right? They become educated, they become doctors, lawyers, professors. They love their country. They speak the language. They're eating schnitzel, chicken schnitzel, right? Right? But they become really good citizens. This is the problem for the far right, right? Because you've turned immigrants into good citizens. This is a problem. So what do? You return back to an older way of thinking, not only Blut and Boden, but also the issue of Geist. Geist. Spirit, yeah? So while blood and soil are physical markers, right, you can clearly see this person might be coming from North Africa, or they might be coming from the subcontinent, but they live in Germany or the Netherlands. What is Geist? Geist, you can't identify it. So what is it? Geist is the intangible essence of an ethnos, right? Not a demos, of an ethnos, the intangible essence of an ethnos. It's the culmination of their Dasein, of their being there, their oneness in time and history as a single people, right? And that Geist is exclusive to the ethnos and to the people who are bound to the ethnos no matter what their politics are, right? No matter what the politicians say, no matter what the government and the Constitution is, right? Geist belongs to the ethnos. So this is a return you're seeing in far-right discussions, especially among philosophers. It's a return to ethnophilosophy, a return to Fichte, a return to Hegel, a return to Heidegger, and not the more progressive parts of some of those thinkers, right? But the more regressive parts. For example, Fichte's 1806-13 address to the German nation. This is when Germany starts to think as a nation instead of as a bunch of random principalities that are oftentimes at each other's throat. No, but we Germans who are bound together by our language that Luther created, right? That shared heritage. That's what makes us German, and we have a singular Geist. Even though we have differences in regions, we have a singular Geist. So the Geist, in this sense, becomes a means of locking newcomers out of belonging to a society, right? Because Geist is not attainable via ascribed citizenship, right? Even if you're second, third, fourth generation Turkish in Germany, you still don't share the German Geist, no matter what the politics are, no matter what the Constitution says, no matter if you're a citizen or not, you're still locked out of Geist, right? So Geist becomes a boundary for the translation proviso. No matter how much you translate Islam and its ethical and moral principles, values, and ideals into post-metaphysical language, no matter how much you integrate, it simply doesn't matter because you're locked out of the Geist of the German peoples, right? And again, you could say the same thing about the French and the Dutch and the Polish and the Italians, right? Now, this creates what this new category, I made it up, sorry, it comes out of Greek, but the idea of the inherent alien, which is the anatopos, topos meaning a place, and ana is the negation of that place. So this is not the idea that other ethnicities, people of other religious communities are inferior, right? That's that old way of thinking about racism and whatnot. But simply that they're of a different Geist, and therefore, when you are Turkish in Germany, you're simply in the wrong place, anatopos. So it's not you're inferior, as they would say about the Jews, the Nazis said about the Jews, right? There's something wrong with their blood and things like this. No. You're just in the wrong place. You simply don't belong here. We would love to go visit you in Turkey. We would love to go visit you in Morocco, because that's where you belong, right? But you have come here. You're in the wrong place. Right? Because you don't share our Geist, and because you don't have the Geist of the nation, because you can't ascribe the Geist, therefore you are permanent alien in our society. So this is a way of getting around integration and saying no matter how much you do integrate, you're never going to be German or Dutch or Italian or Spanish, right? So, and this is being used within the discussions about Überfremdung. Überfremdung is, of course, over-foreignization. You'll hear that being said by the AfD, right? That there's too many foreigners and they're permanent foreigners. So Überfremdung is a problem. Amalgamation, right, which is what the United States is, what Canada is, the amalgamation of peoples coming together. We create new societies, new cultures, whatnot from the cultural resources of a lot of different peoples. Against Islamization, when you're talking about the subject of Muslims taking over Europe, which is a constant discourse, which is absurd, but nevertheless, this comes up again here. And then also miscegenation, the actual intermarrying of peoples. So, in conclusion, the issue may be less about Islam and Muslims in Europe and more about the legacy and reality of the European Enlightenment. Is the Enlightenment still possible? Right, the universal ideas of the Enlightenment, that all peoples, whatever race, whatever ethnicity, whatever religion, they can come together in a universal understanding using reason to reason together and create a society and an equal society. Is that still possible when we're returning to this type of Geist talk, right? The idea of the Willensgemeinschaft was revolutionary at one point in time. And opposed by Nazis and other far-right ideologies. You saw this just recently in the United States when Trump was trying to get rid of our birthright citizenship. Was one of the revolutionary things about the American Constitution. If you're born in American soil, it does not matter where you come from, you are an American, right? I mean, that's just a revolutionary idea, right? That also you had in France as well. But Trump wanted to get rid of it. Why? Because too many people outside of the Western countries were coming to the United States and having children, and those were called anchor babies, and then you could bring your whole family over, and too much of that was going on. But nevertheless, the Supreme Court held on to the idea of the Willensgemeinschaft and birthright citizenship. It is still the motto of the United States, e pluribus unum, from the many one. That is, of course, now being challenged. When that was first the motto of the United States, it was predominantly of Europeans, but that has, over the course of our history, expanded and gotten bigger. We are still one people with an infinite amount of diversity in the United States, but we are one people. We talk a lot about diversity. I think we also have to talk about why we are still one people, right? Now, that's not a popular claim, but my claim nonetheless. Now, the West post-World War II embraced the Willensgemeinschaft over the Volksgemeinschaft was the universal promise of the Enlightenment. We saw what happened when people were still thinking in ethnic terms and in nationalism and turning that into absolutism. Of course, it was devastating. It ended in World War II and the Holocaust. Liberté, égalité, and fraternité for all, regardless of ethnos, is the Geist of modern democracy, which I think we must still hold on to. And the decoupling of the demos and the ethnos and the inclusion of the other is what makes the promise of the Enlightenment possible. It's the reason why the Frankfurt School scholars after World War II, especially Horkheimer and Adorno, insisted on going back to Germany as Jews, back to Germany, right? The Enlightenment had to still be possible. We had to make it real. And ultimately, this is reinforcing what is needed in the West, I believe, that we have to return to our Enlightenment roots and in order to undermine the neo-tribalism that is being reborn under this idea of the national Geist. So with that, I'm done. Thank you.